I'd like to ask all the panelists, take your seats, and please, our moderator of the panel, who is Mr. Colin Wilcock. He's chairman of the governing board for 6G Infrastructure Association, and we will ask to this panel, how can we get back to European leadership in global digitalization processes in the current geopolitical reality? Yes, there are two stages. This one we have is on policies and strategies, and next stage, which is also available on the platform, is about innovation and technology. So we will be competing with that. Colin, welcome.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction. Good morning, everyone. Obviously, that's a lot of extra pressure, which I've just become aware of, that there's going to be voting and competition and things like that. I suppose we live in that sort of world. That's only fair. So I think from the speeches so far, I think we all agree that digitalization is very important. And I guess that's why you're sitting here and have taken the time. But there is a fundamental tension here, which I think is at the core of this panel. And that is the fact that on the one side, it is so important that Europe has access to this technology, this future technology, the 5G technology today, 5G advanced technology tomorrow, 6G technology in the future. But we also need to make sure that we consider the security aspect, the sourcing, where we get this technology from. On the other hand, these cellular technologies, by their definition, need to be global technologies, global standards. We need to work with international partners to actually create these standards. We need that scale to actually make it economically viable to create these things. So that tension, what do we need to be doing locally or within Europe, and what do we need to be doing internationally, and how do we get that balance right? That's really at the crux, I think, of what we want to discuss on this panel, or certainly one of the aspects. And we have the luxury of a very distinguished panel to discuss these issues. So we have four distinguished panelists. Firstly, Konstantinos Massilos, who is president of Hellenic Telecoms and Post Commission and also chair for 2023 in BEREC. We have Jaroslav Pondo, who is head of ITU Office for Europe, International Telecommunications Union. Ulrich Knudsen, who is Deputy Secretary General of OECD. And Thibaut Kleiner, who is Director of Policy, Strategy and Outreach at the European Commission, who is joining us remotely. Now, because I'm fundamentally a lazy moderator, rather than me going through all the details of each of the panelists, I will ask each panelist to maybe spend 3 or 5 minutes just to introduce themselves, their organization, but also what are their activities in the organization they're representing, and what's the angle they're representing in this discussion. So maybe I could start with you, Konstantinos, maybe you'd be so kind.
Thank you so much. It's really great to be in 5G Techritory 2022, and I would like to first to congratulate the organizers for the great event and also thank them for having me here as a speaker. As Colin said, I wear two hats here. I am the president of the Hellenic Telecommunications and Post Commission, the national regulator for telecoms and post, and also competition authority for both markets. But also I'm the incoming BEREC chair for 2023. So I would like to discuss briefly BEREC's perspective on these very important issues of digitalization and connectivity as part of digitalization. So the body of European regulators for electronic communication is a kind of umbrella organization for national regulators for electronic communications in Europe. And the main objective of BEREC is to contribute to the development and the good functioning of the European market of electronic communications networks and services by fostering high quality, independent and consistent regulation. So this is our main objective. BEREC, the mandate of BEREC comes mainly from the European Electronic Communications Code, established in 2018, also from some other pieces of regulation like the Open Internet Regulation, And BEREC develops guidelines, recommendations, opinions on issues related to electronic communications, but recently also to digital issues as well. And also BEREC is responsible to take care of cross-border dispute resolution issues to enable a European Union harmonization. In our 2021-2025 strategy, BEREC identified 3 key strategic priorities. First, to support connectivity and enable both the rollout of very high capacity networks, but also the take-up of the services coming out from these networks. In the end, we want these networks to be accessible to all citizens. Second, to support sustainable and open digital markets. And third, to empower end users. So these are the 3 key strategic priorities of BEREC for towards 25. As I said, BEREC's mandate comes and is defined through the European Electronic Communications Code, but recently we see that the recently established Digital Markets Act regulation foresees a role for BEREC. BEREC is part of the high-level group that will support the European Commission in enforcing the Digital Markets Act regulation. And this is quite in line with a trend we see today, a trend towards softwareization and cloudification of telecoms networks, but also a convergence between information and communication technologies, the I and the C of ICT technologies. And I believe, and this is my personal view, that in the future we will see a shift from traditional electronic communications regulators to ICT or digital regulators. For example, today we see also discussions about the recently established Digital Services Act regulation in Europe, where I believe electronic communications regulators have a very important role to play in the enforcement at national level. Furthermore, the Data Act regulation is still in preparation, and the discussion keeps going. And there, in the early stages, we saw that a role is foreseen for electronic communications regulators. So we see this shift from traditional electronic communications and connectivity issues to digital issues. So this is the focus of BEREC. So electronic communications is a central part, in any case, of digitalization, is a platform to enable digitalization. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Jaroslav?
Thank you very much, and great to be here. We are accompanying as the International Telecommunication Union this event since it has been established 5 years ago. So it's a great pleasure to see how this platform evolves and how it is positioning. I'm coming from the ITU. My Deputy Secretary General already provided you some glimpse of our strategic priorities, but indeed we are coming from the amazing UN Agency for Digital, which for many years was focusing on the connectivity, and even we are claiming we are here to connect the world. But when in October we met with all administrations from 194 countries, the message agreed among all of them was, we are not here only to connect. We are also to ensure that we can ensure the sustainable digital transformation. And this is, I think, something what comes already in the interventions which we have heard and which we'll be hearing today very predominantly, because in fact, digitalization and the way how we are building upon the connectivity, it's something what inspires a lot of stakeholders. So digital is not any longer a silo. This is what we are telling for many, many years. When the member states came together in Minneapolis in '98, saying digital is important for the socio-economic growth. We need, at the level of the heads of states, to discuss the future of information society. there were some mixed feelings, yes? But finally, everybody understood that the digital is in the center of the attention of the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda. And in fact, nobody agreed to recognize the ICTs, digital, as the challenge because it's cross-cutting. Every single UN agency, our sister agency, wants to work on the digital. This is great to see. As the UN Agency for Digital, we are very much pleased to observe this. But on the other hand, it's very challenging to make sure that this collaboration not happens only at the global level, but also at the regional and the national level. This is the reason why the ITU is so much active in all those settings. And this is very important also to note that ITU is bringing very unique spirit. From the beginning of the ITU, we are always trying to make sure that we are following multi-stakeholder character. This is one of the few UN agencies which are bringing to the table, when we're doing the decisions, private sector, member states, regulators, but also the academia, research houses, SMEs, and many, many others, who all of them, they're coming and discuss 5G. How it can expand, how it can be relevant, and how it can find a home at the ITU, but also beyond. How it should be used by the others, exactly to answer those questions which many CEOs of the telcos are bringing to the ITU. How can I create the business model which will ensure the revenues? And I think we are still working on that. This is the reason why the ITU as the home for the telco, but also for the others, is such an important platform to engage with and to support. Because there we can find the consensus. We're never voting, so we're never dismissing somebody. Every conference of the ITU is letting all people go home equally unhappy because they have to compromise. There is never only half of the world which will go unhappy to the world. And this is the home. And this is something what really inspires us, because the digital, and in particular 5G, should not have the borders. We should not differentiate. We should work on the technologies, on the standards, to find the solutions that we can advance. And we can really help the research houses, private sector to support the sustainable development. Myself, personally, I'm coming from the IT office for Europe, which has dual function. On the one hand, we're dealing with the 46 member states. We are the interface for the ITU to make sure that you can make the best use out of the development sector, standardization sector, radio communication sector, that you can efficiently navigate through this quite complex organization, but as I mentioned, very useful to the sector. On the other hand, we're also working with the stakeholders to make sure how to ensure that the European region, European stakeholders can use the international platforms such as this UN Agency for Digital in order to expand, to promote and to export such a knowledge base, success stories, harmonization of regulatory approaches. This is the success story of Europe, which we can be proud of, and where the rest of the world is very hungry to know how to do this, how to do this right, and how to learn from the best to become the best. So I will stop here.
Thank you, sir. Then maybe I can move on to Ulrich.
Thank you so much, Colin. I'm Ulrik Vestergaard Knudsen. I'm Deputy Secretary General at the OECD. I've been that for 4 years. I'm covering various issues such as accession, external relations, trade, agriculture, but also the digital transformation, and then I'm also the OECD Gender Champion. And let me start by saying that I am extremely proud, extremely grateful to be here in my role as DSG for digital transformation. This is a hugely important conference. I was here last year virtually and very happy to be here physically. But I'm slightly less proud of being here in my role as OECD Gender Champion. We're 1 hour into this conference now. We've had 8 men on stage. We've had 3 men on screens. Not a single woman have we heard from so far. honestly, we have to do better than these straight manners. I won't ask for a round of applause. There are too few women in the room. No. But let me get back to the issue of digital transformation, which is something that the OECD has been working on for decades. In fact, our biggest horizontal project, when we work together across the whole OECD, is on digital transformation called Going Digital. We dive into all sorts of areas, and as was said by previous speakers, this really is about, of course, harnessing the benefits of the digital transformation, but certainly also being on the lookout for all the traps that come with the digital transformation. We're certainly optimists here. I'm a very strong believer that without the digital transformation, we would not have survived as individuals, as consumers, as voters, as countries, the corona pandemic. Imagine if the pandemic had struck, let's say, in 92, before we had internet and mobile phones. We would have faced much starker choices between shutting down our economies completely with all the poverty and the lack of jobs that would have entailed, or we could have kept the economy going, but then we would have lost tens of millions of lives, also in Europe, which is the focus of our conference this morning. We are proud to work closely at the OECD also with G7, Germany this year, Japan next year, with G20, Italy last year, Indonesia this year. Next year it's going to be Japan in G7, it's going to be India in G20, becoming increasingly important. We give policy advice, we offer to do norms and standards and regulations. Maybe our biggest success in that arena has been the AI principles that were promoted back in 2019. And we are now working on various other issues, including actually trying to establish some kind of global forum for tech governance, which will have a very, very huge digital component. I was planning to save the advertising for later in this session, but we are having in 2 or 3 weeks our big OECD Digital Ministerial in Spain. And there's several important recommendations coming out of that, including on digital security, on enhanced access to data, but also a suggestion to create at the OECD a global forum for tech governance. I think we need to work together, not least democracies and countries that are joining up when it comes to values like human rights, rule of law, and so on. We need to have a conversation amongst ourselves on how we go about the digital transformation. What are the biggest new technologies and digital revolutions out there? How are they going to affect our societies? If they do, are we going to regulate? If we're going to regulate, how are we going to regulate? And if we are going to regulate, do we need some kind of international coordination? It goes without saying that the answer to most of these questions is a resounding yes, and we need to cooperate more. The OECD is ready to provide our platform as a convening platform at the service of these countries. And it relates to something that the Prime Minister mentioned, that Vice President Dombrovskis mentioned. It relates, in fact, also to what is going on in neighboring countries here, the war in Ukraine. We are entering a new geopolitical era, a time of more geopolitical friction, and I think it is right for democracies. It is right for countries that sign up to human rights to work together on the digital transformation, and not least all the issues around values and surveillance and digital security that come with the digital transformation. We are hoping to take a leap forward on that in Spain in just 2 or 3 weeks by creating a global forum where we can come together also with stakeholders, also with businesses, also with NGOs to discuss these matters. And I guess by way of ending this introduction of what we do at the OECD and myself, I used to be National Security Advisor in Denmark. I used to be Permanent Secretary of State in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So to me, this geopolitical, this value-based context for our discussion is as important as it was to some of the previous speaker. So, thank you.
Thank you, sir. That's certainly got a lot of buzzwords and a lot of key issues that we wish to touch on. So last but not least, maybe I could ask Thibaut to introduce himself and exciting area of the European Commission.
Thank you, Colin. Nice to see you even through the screen, and very honored also to participate in this very high-level panel. I'm also very sorry not to be with you in person. And also, I would join a little bit, what Ulrich was saying in terms of gender balance, but nevertheless, I'm pleased that we can have this discussion today on a very important topic. And just to introduce a little bit myself, so Thibaut Kleiner, I'm the director in DG Connect in charge of policy, strategy and outreach in the European Commission. So for those who don't know the European Commission, we are kind of the government of Europe. And DG Connect is the department that is all about digital. So we develop legislation. You may have heard about the Digital Markets Act, Digital Services Act, that were just approved by Council and Parliament, and that are about to enter into force. It's about platform regulation, but we are also involved in legislation on the telecommunication. We have made proposals on regulation on artificial intelligence. We are helping also developing a single market for data in the EU, and we have the Data Governance Act, Data Act also that has some elements there to facilitate exchange of data between entities. We are also very much involved in cybersecurity, even more now with the Ukraine war, and we have launched various initiatives in that respect, not only on network information security, but also increasingly on ad hoc support to member states to protect infrastructures. And we are of course involved in also in funding activity. In my portfolio, I'm responsible for the digital aspects of Horizon Europe and also for the new program Digital Europe. Each one of them is about 1 billion euros funding per year in the digital sector. So we are trying here to maximize our impact, also involving joint undertakings, so with member states, some of them like in the area of microelectronics, but also directly with industry, and in particular the SNS joint undertaking is preparing the 6G development. So in addition, in my portfolio, I'm also dealing with the development, so indeed of legislation and making sure that they get approved in terms of our interinstitutional issues. But interestingly, today, I'm also in charge of international relations. And I can tell you that digital has become, also as previous speakers were saying, not only a hot topic, but actually the mainstream priorities in the EU's activities. Earlier this week, yesterday, we were signing actually a digital partnership with the Republic of Korea. This is really a very important opportunity to enhance not only our collaboration on policy making, but also on research and on global standards. And we had done the same already before that with Japan. And next week, I'll be traveling to the US for the Trade and Technology Council, which is our main forum, working with the United States. So we are very active indeed on this international sphere. But by and large, I would say that also my activities in charge of strategy for digital is about what we call our digital compass for 2030. This is really a template for what we should deliver by the end of the digital decade, as we call it, 2030. We have a set of KPIs, in industry, you're familiar with this, but we are trying to do the same at the EU level, delivering, for instance, full 5G deployment across the EU, but also enhancing a series of digital infrastructures in cloud, in quantum computing, microelectronics and the like. Also making sure that in our compass, we have these 4 cardinal points. So digital infrastructures is one, but we have also digital skills. Here we want to increase the number of digital experts in the EU. We have a target of 20 million, which is quite ambitious by 2030. We see this as essential for the competitiveness of the EU. But we also are working in this compass on the transformation of business, digitalization of business across the EU. We launched, for instance, through Digital Europe, a number of digital innovation hubs across the EU. The target is 1 per region, and we are funding these hubs to help SMEs and also local administration to digitalize and to enjoy a pan-European network to help them in that context. And finally, indeed, we want to transform the public sector. Through the COVID pandemic, this was one of the important features that public administration are starting to accelerate the transformation. And at the EU level, we've made proposals around, for instance, the e-identity, around also digitalization of public services from justice to internal affairs, and building also networks between member states. So today I'm really pleased to be with you, and I think that the conversation is already showing how important it is to join forces. As far as 5G is concerned, I was myself quite involved in this technology, leading actually the public-private partnership some years ago. But now we are actually investing in the beyond 5G research, even though I believe that there is a lot that still can be done with 5G. And also from an international perspective, I think it's very important that we watch out, because the world is also changing fast, and new architectures are probably an alternative to the existing model of 5G. So that's for me today. And again, very honored to be with you, and I wish I would be there in person.
Super, thank you very much, sir. Because we've made you wait longest, maybe I can address my first question to you, sir, because you've warmed up now, and that's excellent. So you've talked about the European Commission activities. What are the key European digital ambitions beyond that, and especially in regards to connectivity? And what are the major challenges in achieving these ambitions?
So I think that the European Commission is very ambitious as regards digital. We believe that we have everything that is needed to be a world leader. And we also believe that in many respects, our actual strength is overlooked. If you look at 5G technologies, actually 50% of the patents are made in Europe. And in fact, we still have, by and large, leadership in network technologies through the value chain. This is also relevant. Last week, we were inaugurating a new supercomputer in Bologna in Italy, the third most powerful worldwide. And this is just one among many that were benefiting from the EU's investment through our joint undertaking there with member states. Collectively, when the EU plays the European game, we are really at the level of a superpower equivalent to China or the US. So joining forces, I would say, is very much the EU ambition, making sure that our member states really play the European game. And when we play together, we believe that we can be ambitious and we can actually address the challenges of new technologies. So there are 2 points in your question I would emphasize. I mean, first, we also want to make sure that the technology develops according to our values, according to what we stand as Europeans. And that's why we are putting forward actually a declaration on digital rights and principles. It was recently approved at the level of the co-legislators, and I hope that it will be signed, in fact, on the 15th of December by the leaders of the EU. And this declaration actually puts forward our vision for the future, how we want actually the technologies also to develop according to these values, because we don't want to fix things ex post, as we did for the platforms through our legislation. We would like the technology to be designed having these values, these principles in mind. So that's the first thing, really trying to make sure that we shape the digital transformation in a way that is positive for our people, for our citizens, that will deliver according also to our values, which means inclusion, which means sustainability, taking care of the environment, which also means not only growth, but growth that is also for the benefit of the many. So that's what the first point. The second point on connectivity, as you said, I mean, we see connectivity as basically the backbone of the digital transformation. Without access to high-speed networks these days, you are almost prevented as a company, to do a good business. And as a citizen, you don't have access to what you need in terms of public service, in terms of access to culture, entertainment, in terms of being integrated in society. So that's why for 2030, we've set this target that every European should have access to high-speed network and to 5G. So this is something really that we are very serious about. But these all elements, on the one side, the value, on the other side, the technological leadership and, the connectivity means that we have a challenge in terms of investment. I think it's the first challenge, especially these days with the Ukraine war, with the energy crisis. Sometimes we see that priorities have reversed back, like in the 1950s, when it was all about fighting inflation and finding food for you people and heating them. We think that digital has a role to play, but we need to put also the money on the table. And that's what we are trying also to secure from the EU's perspective. One thing I would flag in that context is the new idea that we have, which is called multi-country projects. I think it's very relevant for today's conference because it has also a regional angle. The idea is that member states don't need always to team up at 27. So we don't need always the full EU to invest, but at least 3 or 4, or a region like the Nordic and Baltic region could very well team up around investment projects, from 5G connectivity to cloud computing, to quantum and the like. And we are facilitating now this joint investment through notably new legal entities and vehicles. So that's something I would flag as one of the key challenges, maintaining investment for leadership and using these multi-country projects.
Super, thank you, sir. Costas, would you like to give a view of this question?
Yeah, thank you, Colin. Indeed, Europe has set some very ambitious objectives with regards to ICT towards 2030. For example, the take-up of cloud services, the use of artificial intelligence, and also the connectivity objectives, 1 gigabit per second connectivity for all users in Europe till 2030, plus 100% coverage of populated areas in Europe by 5G. So this is indeed very, very important and very ambitious. There are challenges with regards to achieving these objectives, and deployment of very high capacity networks is a capital intensive project. So investments and creating an environment that is good for investing in very high capacity networks deployment is very important. So we need to come up with policies and regulatory frameworks that will encourage investments and at the same time address the demand side so that this network infrastructure will be financially viable afterwards and also accessible to all citizens. And in the end, we need to have services for our citizens offered at competitive prices. So this is one challenge, and we need some regulatory interventions to support this. So, for example, we need to reconsider, when it comes to wireless networks, to reconsider spectrum assignment procedures and focus mainly on some more development-friendly spectrum auctions, for example, or need to promote infrastructure sharing to reduce network deployment costs, or promote passive infrastructure access frameworks that will reduce, again, network deployment costs. We have in progress the Broadband Cost Reduction Directive revision in Europe and the new access recommendation in this direction, or maybe support the use of the right technology mix to achieve all these connectivity objectives. For example, FTTH is a very good technology, but in some cases fixed wireless access can be a good alternative to reduce costs in specific areas, or even combine these two technologies with satellite connectivity. So there are a few things we can do to achieve all these digital transformation objectives, and we should not forget that these objectives are strongly linked to our sustainability objective. Because Europe aims at, if we see the European Green Deal, Europe wants to become a climate neutral continent by 2050, and this means that we need to reduce gas emissions by 55% compared to 1990 levels by 2030. This is still relevant to our networks because our networks and digital infrastructure contributes to these gas emissions and energy dissipation. And we need to have in mind when deploying networks that we should not only aim at making our networks faster, but also more energy efficient. And well, just one comment with regards to international collaboration that has been discussed before, because international collaboration is part of BEREC's agenda. What we see today, for example, in electronic communications, we see the volume of electronic communications becoming larger and larger, and the data, the amount of data exchange becoming huge. So this means that electronic communications and services in this field is of global importance. And when we consider policies, regulations, and legislations, these have to be discussed at a global scale. So collaboration is very important. And what we have seen in BEREC so far, it's very important benefit to have exchange on cross-border issues and on common issues with other areas, and we can take advantage of experiences, best practices, etc. And at the same time, makes us easier to follow up on technology trends and new business models that are crucial when we design new regulatory frameworks. So BEREC has been quite active in international collaboration and has already established links with International Telecommunication Union and OECD, and will continue in this direction.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to say that I agree very much with what Thibault said, and I want to commend the EU for its ambitions. I think the EU has set all the right targets. I speak for the OECD in 38 countries, and the EU and its members are only part of that. And there are, of course, regulatory differences also in approach across the Atlantic between the US and Europe sometimes. But I think Thibault really nails it when he says that Europe has the potential to be a superpower along US and China in digital. It's not always the case right now. I think Europe needs more investment in AI, perhaps more investment also some of the other cutting-edge technologies where there is a lack of investment if we compare Europe to other superpowers or wannabe superpowers. But I think the European Commission is a real force for ambition and in setting the right goals. And I want to also thank Thibault and his colleagues in the European Commission for a tremendous cooperation between the EU and the OECD. I was in Brussels only 2 weeks ago speaking to some of Thibault's colleagues, and we plan to celebrate that partnership in Spain just 2 weeks down the line. So please continue to rely on the OECD for input. I see the clock is ticking, so I'm afraid I'm not going to get the floor again, Colin. Let me end by saying also that, of course, we should be mindful of all the issues we've discussed today. There are issues around digital skills, around digital access, certainly around digital gap, getting rural areas connected fully. Europe, by the way, is at 87% now. It's pretty impressive, but also some of the security and value issues. But having said all that, I think we should also be mindful of the fact that the digital transformation holds the key to promoting and securing in a right direction so many of the mega trends that we're talking about these days. We will not get increased productivity and therefore global growth if we don't have a digital transformation to spur productivity. We will not probably solve the climate change crisis of this planet if we do not have the right digital investment, the right digital or technological input. But even if we look at the very, very near term, the most urgent economic challenge we're facing as a globe, namely inflation, also the digital transformation is cutting costs. Digital transformation itself is sort of putting a ceiling on inflation. So if I don't get the floor again, Colin, let me say that there's so many reasons why we should make absolutely sure that we think of the digital transformation as a help towards more globalization, avoiding too much unnecessary decoupling, solving the climate change challenge, and even perhaps also having democracies as a force for good and a force for ambition in a more and more divided, possibly divided world.
Thank you, sir. We are indeed, unfortunately, running out of time. It seems that last summing up, you gave enough material for about 5 conferences, so congratulations, that's excellent. I'd like to come back to Jaroslav and what is the role of international cooperation in all of this digitalization and electronic communication?
Yeah, thanks a lot. Just before going to that, I think that this is very important to remember, and we as the international telecommunication always we are putting different regions in comparison. So it's not to deny that at the international comparison, the Europe leads, yes. But also once we are delving into the analysis of the region, we have, in our case of the definition of the region, we have 46 countries. We have also divides. And I think we cannot forget about that we have to really work on all of them. Yes, rural, urban divide is one of those where the technologies like 5G help and provide a lot of opportunities, but we have to work also on the skills device, education, and not only basic skills, but also this upskilling of the people that they can really be the part of the digital future. So then we're taking a look at the Europe as the digital excellence. Of course, also the Europe has industry, amazing potential of scaling up, and I think with all efforts of the EU, we are getting there. But also in this context, we should not forget about the international platforms. And here, in particular, I'm talking about the standardization processes. We're very glad to see recent decision on the EU standardization strategy, which in fact takes into account the necessity of engaging the European institutions and industry and all stakeholders in the international standardization process, because this will provide them the access to the markets, access to the scale, and really to the real leadership, which the region is aiming at. So we are looking forward to this. ITU is very much open to engaging much more industry from European stakeholders, much more proactive approach of bringing the tech innovation into the standardization processes. Also equally important is the international dialogue, and this is the reason why the UN processes also are of such a big importance. At the UN level, we are currently working on the Digital Global Compact, taking a look at different digital challenges of the world, maybe not challenges, but more opportunities, once the world is getting united to have the joint vision. In Europe, we are always telling that we would like to see the human-centric approach for all technologies to be developed. Yes, that's true, let's work towards that, but let's also, other part of the world, understand what we mean by that, and of the values proposed behind that we can progress much faster and have the consensus and developed much faster. So from our side, of course, we are very much keen to promote the European excellence. As I mentioned already, the harmonization and the regulatory approach is one of the great success stories of the European region. There is a big hunger of the rest of the world to learn from the European practices. In June, we will meet at the Global Symposium of Regulators, where also the BEREC will be playing a very important role to see how to also promote those values and how to help the world to advance on the digital transformation. And just to close my intervention, talking about digital transformation is also important that we have the joint understanding what digital transformation means. There will be, and there are already clear discussions regarding the determination what in fact it means for everyone, for the whole world. From our perspective, we have developed the framework of the digital transformation wheel, which we are providing to the countries as the better, easy way to digest way forward, to align their strategies, and that we can also support them in accelerating this process, which very often can happen by itself, but very often also requires the support of the international community, and we're always happy to be there with the other partners. Thank you.
Super, thank you. I think we now have a few minutes for questions still, if that's correct.
Yep.
So you've had the chance to have your coffee and digest. Now either the floor here physically or indeed remote, if there are some questions.
Yeah, here's the mic. Just raise your hand, please, if you have any questions or comments. Maybe
Don't be shy. Now's the time for you to put those really tricky questions.
or objections, maybe.
Or objections.
Sure. Yep.
Please go ahead.
Hi there, Dean Bubley. I'm an industry analyst. A question, there's a couple of comments that come up today about industry structure for networks and telecoms. And I'm curious if the panel has any particular views on what you see changing. I mean, I write quite a lot about things like neutral host, wholesale models and enterprise private networks. Where do you see in, say, 2030, will there be a defined telco, or will there be a much broader set of participants?
Who fancies answering this? Please, go ahead.
Well, indeed, we see today a change in the telecoms industry with what I said earlier, a shift towards cloudification and softwareization of networks. So this means that we will move, especially in the core part of the network, from the traditional closed or customized approach of building networks to something more cloud-based and software-based. And this, I believe, will introduce a number of changes, reduce costs at the core part of the network, and also maybe lower the barriers for new entrants. So this is one trend I see in telecoms networks, and this is something BEREC will study in the context of Work Program 2023, so next year.
Any other comments?
Well, just to add upon this, I think that this is very important to map all stakeholders which are relevant, and not to disregard the value proposition which we are there bringing into the building the whole ICT ecosystem. Not only focusing and targeting traditional operators, but also creating the space for innovating for others who are arriving, in order by the end of the day also to bring the communication services, maybe being the future design for the next generation. So that's why I think that inclusiveness in this process is very important. In the ITU, we are working with all stakeholders at the level of the standardization level, and also at the radio communication level. And there are many different developments which also bring the new non-traditional stakeholders who never were seen as the communication organizations in the ecosystem. Now they're at the table and discussing their role, and we are encouraging them to be part of those conversations, not being upset that they are too small or maybe too innovative to be at the level of the international organizations discussing those structures.
Super. I'm afraid we run out of time, and I don't wish to stop you having coffee or important stuff. I think it's been an interesting panel from my side. I think we've heard that Europe has ambitious plans in digitalization. There are some issues which we need to resolve. There is clearly an international element we also need to take into account. But perhaps I'd like to start by thanking an excellent panel for their participation. Thank you very much.
And thank you, Colin. Thank you very much.